There's a specific prayer that pulls your shattered pieces back together. Not the kind you've been taught, but the kind whispered in the darkest hour when no one's watching. I discovered it in a church basement at 3 a.m., sobbing into my hands when every religious word I'd memorized suddenly felt hollow. What happened in those 5 minutes didn't just mend my heart. It exposed why heartbreak exists in the first place and why most prayers never touch it. The truth: we've been praying to heal the wrong wound. Let me take you back to the night everything collapsed. I was sitting on cold concrete, my chest physically atching, and I couldn't tell anymore where emotional pain ended and my body began. Heartbreak does that. It merges your soul with your nervous system until you're just one raw nerve walking around pretending to be human. I'd prayed every prayer I knew, the gentle ones, the warrior declarations, the scripture quoting mountain moving prayers that are supposed to shift atmospheres. Nothing moved. My heart stayed broken, and God felt like He was on the other side of soundproof glass. Then something shifted, not in heaven, but in my understanding. I stopped asking God to take the pain away. I stopped begging Him to fix what was broken. Instead, I did something that felt almost heretical. I invited Him into the brokenness itself. Picture this: a shattered mirror lying on the floor. Most of us pray for God to replace the mirror, to give us a new one, to make us forget the old reflection ever existed. But that's not how the deepest healing works. God doesn't hand you a replacement heart. He kneels down beside the shattered pieces and says, "Let me show you what you couldn't see when it was whole." That night, I prayed 5 sentences. Just 5. But each one felt like I was unlocking a door I didn't know existed inside my chest. The first sentence wasn't pretty. It was raw honesty about the rage I'd been hiding under my good Christian exterior. The second was permission, something I'd never given myself. Permission to grieve without a timeline. Permission to not be strong. The third sentence was the turning point. I asked God to show me the wound beneath the wound, the original fracture that this heartbreak had simply reopened. And suddenly I was 7 years old again, watching someone walk away, learning that love means abandonment. Heartbreak is never just about the present. It's an archaeological dig that exposes every old cut you buried under spiritual cliches and personal ambition. The fourth sentence was an acknowledgement. I named the lies that heartbreak had planted. I'm too broken to be chosen. Love always leaves. My heart isn't safe with anyone. Lies feel like truth when your chest is caving in, but speaking them out loud breaks their hypnotic power. The fifth sentence was the most terrifying. I choose to let this transform me instead of define me, not heal me, transform me. There's a difference. Healing implies you go back to who you were before. Transformation means you become someone the pain couldn't touch the same way again. Someone with a scar that tells a story of survival, not shame. When I finished those 5 sentences, I didn't feel instantly whole, but I felt something else. I felt held, like God had been waiting for me to stop performing recovery and start actually recovering. The H didn't vanish, but its meaning changed. It stopped being evidence of my brokenness and became proof that I'd loved deeply enough to risk everything. And that kind of courage, even when it shatters you, is holy. Most people think heartbreak is about the relationship that ended, the person who left, or the dream that died. But that's just the surface earthquake. The real devastation is happening in the subterranean layers of your soul. When someone breaks your heart, it doesn't create a new wound. It tears open an old one you've been carrying since childhood. Maybe it's the parent who wasn't emotionally available, the friend who betrayed you in middle school, the first time you learned that being yourself wasn't enough to make someone stay. This is why heartbreak feels so disproportionately catastrophic. You're not just grieving one loss, you're grieving every loss that taught you the same lesson. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between past and present pain. It stacks them on top of each other until you're suffocating under the weight of accumulated abandonment. The 5-minute prayer begins here, asking God to show you the original wound, not to shame you or prove you're broken, but to reveal where the enemy planted the seed of you're not worth staying for. Because until you see that first fracture, you'll keep attracting situations that press on it, mistaking repetition for destiny. When you pray, show me the wound beneath this wound, you're not asking for more pain. You're asking for clarity. You're giving God permission to be a surgeon instead of a band-aid. And here's what's mysterious. The moment you see the original wound clearly, its power over you begins to dissolve. Not because it disappears, but because you finally understand it's been lying to you about who you are. That childhood wound said you're unlovable. This heartbreak just agreed with it. But neither one gets to write your story anymore. There's a toxic belief circulating in spiritual communities that fast healing equals strong faith. That if you're still crying 3 months later, you're somehow failing at Christianity. That true believers get over it quickly and move forward with unshakable joy. This is a demonic distortion of resilience. God never gave you a deadline for your tears. He gave you tear ducts for a reason. They're not a design flaw in your spirituality. They're evidence of your humanity. Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb, even though he knew the resurrection was coming minutes later. He didn't skip the grief just because he knew the ending. He honored the weight of the loss in real time. When you give yourself permission to grieve without watching the calendar, something profound happens. You stop performing recovery and start actually experiencing it. You stop pretending you're fine in front of people who can't hold space for your pain. You stop spiritualizing your numbness and calling it faith. The prayer includes this sentence: I give myself permission to grieve as long as my soul needs. Not as long as feels comfortable to others. Not as long as seems reasonable. As long as your soul actually needs. Because here's the truth most won't tell you. Rushed healing is just buried pain with a Christian smile painted over it. And buried pain doesn't disappear, it calcifies. It becomes bitterness, cynicism, emotional unavailability, and an unconscious vow never to risk your heart again. God isn't rushed. He spent 40 years preparing Moses in the desert. He let David run from Saul for years before the throne. He's not standing over you with a stopwatch, disappointed that you're still broken. Grieve deeply. Grieve honestly. Grieve until the tears run clear. Heartbreak doesn't just hurt, it whispers. And if you're not careful, those whispers become the narration of your entire life. You're too much. You're not enough. Love always ends in loss. Your heart isn't safe with anyone. You'll always be chosen second. These aren't just thoughts, they're identity assassins, quietly rewriting your internal script while you're too devastated to notice. The enemy's strategy isn't to scream lies at you, it's to whisper them during your most vulnerable moments so they sound like your own voice, so they feel like wisdom instead of warfare, so you mistake trauma responses for truth. This is why the fourth sentence of the prayer is so critical. You must name the lies out loud before they name you. You must drag them into the light and speak them in front of God, not because He doesn't already know, but because you need to hear how absurd they sound when you stop agreeing with them internally. When you say out loud, I've been believing that I'm unlovable, something breaks in the spiritual realm. The lie loses its hypnotic power. It can't hide in your subconscious anymore, masquerading as self-awareness. Here's what's mysterious. The lie's heartbreak plans are never new. They're always customized versions of the original wound. The enemy doesn't create new material. He just keeps replaying your greatest hits of shame and abandonment, hoping you'll mistake familiarity for truth. But the moment you name them, you reclaim authority. You stop being haunted by narratives you never consciously agreed to. And you create space for God to speak the counter narrative. the truth about who you are beneath every shattered expectation. This is the sentence that separates survivors from overcomers. I choose to let this transform me instead of define me. Most people pray for healing because they want to return to who they were before the heartbreak. They want the old version of themselves back. The one who trusted easily, loved freely, believed the best in people. But here's the hard truth: that version of you is gone. Not because you failed, but because pain changed you at a cellular level. And that's not the tragedy we think it is. Healing implies restoration to original condition. Transformation implies evolution into something stronger. God isn't interested in taking you backward. He's interested in taking you deeper, into a version of yourself that's been through fire and didn't burn up, that's been shattered and chose to let the light in through the cracks. The prayer doesn't ask God to erase what happened. It asks Him to alchemize it, to take the worst thing that ever happened to your heart and turn it into the very thing that makes you untouchable by lesser pains. Not because you're numb, but because you've developed spiritual antibodies. When you pray for transformation instead of healing, you stop waiting to feel like your old self. You stop measuring your progress by how quickly you can pretend it didn't hurt. Instead, you lean into the metamorphosis, the painful, uncomfortable, terrifying process of becoming someone the heartbreak couldn't kill. This version of you knows how to love without losing yourself, knows how to grieve without drowning, and knows how to stay soft in a world that rewards hardness. That's not weakness, that's warfare level resilience.